If you do not wish to be a part of the recording, feel free to turn your video off. Megan, Molly, or Amy, are one of you able to record? Oh, you are. Okay, cool. Or am I recording? Recording on this computer. Is it recording? I can't actually tell.
I got
Cool.
it. I got it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Because there's like a little tiny bubble I can see, but neat. All right. I feel like all the professors who are like, how to Zoom. Okay, so today we'll be talking about written application materials. And there'll be a couple of spots for questions throughout, but if you have specific questions, feel free to just jump in as we go. I'll try to be aware of the chat as well, but if anybody else sees comments, feel free to stop me. Okay. So many things. Okay. Here we go. So why are we doing a presentation about written application materials? What's the big deal? Written application materials are super important because that is the first thing that you're going to send off to, a prospective employer or graduate advisor, a fellowship committee. This is, your chance to kind of explain to them who you are besides just a couple of checkboxes you probably marked on the application itself. So you really want to sell yourself, who you are, your ideas, how you're specifically qualified for this position. If it's a research proposal, the ideas that you've come up with and how that kind of brings together your creativity and your scientific thinking. And bringing all of this together and making it a really strong piece of writing is super important because this is going to be the first thing that your application reader gets as a window into who you are and how you might be well qualified or well fit for this position. Often, written applications are just the first step in a longer application process. So you'll be moving on perhaps to in-person interviews, phone interviews, and hopefully getting an offer for the job, fellowship, grad position, whatever you're interested in. And so it's really important to make sure that what you give them is your best representation of yourself and who you are so that they're intrigued, they want to know more about you, and they really feel like you're a good fit for their program. As many people like to say, you only get one chance at a first impression. And this is a really great way to make it really count and stand out. There could be, hundreds of other applicants for a certain position or, grad school or something like that. And so you want to make sure that they, after they've, read 100 applicants, stuff, that they remember yours specifically. And so in this webinar, we're going to start off with a quick little small group discussion. It'll be painless, I promise, just to kind of get you thinking about your relationship with writing or where you are right now in trying to, write things if you're currently in that process, or things you might be writing in the future if you're not writing anything right now. And then we'll dive in a little more deeply to personal statements and research statements and kind of examples and tips and tricks and things you might want to think about as you're writing these. We'll take questions after that kind of first half of the section. And then we'll shift to either some breakout rooms on specific topics. If you are currently writing something and want to talk with a grad student about, maybe getting a peer reviewer or just specific questions you have, we'll take those. And so that time, second half will be a little more freeform for what people want and how we can best help you. So we will first jump in, come on, there we go, to small groups. So in this, we're gonna just hop into some small groups and think about when you're writing a draft of some sort of written thing. Say you're, writing a personal statement for some application. What's your writing process? How do you like to get started? Do you typically outline the entire thing? Do you just start at random paragraphs and draft in pieces and put it together at the end? Do you do something different? And are there any challenges you face when you're trying to write because of this? Something that maybe even if you're writing a paper for a class, I'm going to have a hard time because this is one thing that I know about myself when I'm writing. And then share with other folks in your group if you're currently writing any applications or things like that, or expecting to start some soon. And if you are, feel free to share any specific questions you have or things you could use help on and we can kind of bring back all of those ideas later in the presentation. So I'm going to, there we go. Breakout rooms. All right, how many? We have 10 people and at least 4 of them are us. So we're gonna break into 3 rooms. 2 rooms. Let's do 2 rooms because otherwise it's gonna be 3 people. And that could be 2 of us. So hop on off. We're gonna hop on off to breakout rooms. So the questions are, what's your writing process or style? Do you face any challenges, and what are you currently working on writing? We'll spend just like a couple minutes, 5, 10 in there, and then we'll come back as a group. Okay, looks like we got everybody back. Yes, cool. All right, from what it sounded like, everybody had good conversations in their breakout rooms. We can continue some of that conversation after the next couple of slides if anybody's interested, or if we have some time at the end, but it sounded like you were all talking about good stuff together. So I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen. Okay, so yeah, good conversation on that. And we will, come on, move on to the next slide. Okay, so generally when folks are writing applications, there's kind of 2 general realms of statements that you could be asked to write. The first is a personal statement. These come in a lot of different flavors and may have different names. And the other is the research statement. So your personal statement is, not surprisingly, about you. So in this, you're really focused on who you are, why you're interested in this position, how you're qualified. Basically, it's your chance to, showcase the personality behind all of the little check boxes or the lines on your CV. Personal statements vary a lot depending on what the application specifically asks for, and you should definitely always tailor your answer to what the call is asking. But it could be anything from, your personal relevant background, training or experiences. Those could be like classes or jobs you've had, extracurriculars you've been a part of, research, those kinds of things. A lot of places are starting to ask for diversity statements, which is a chance for you to kind of talk about things that make you unique from everybody else. Often these are geared at involving more BIPOC students or students from underrepresented backgrounds, like first-generation college students. So if you fall into one of those categories, or different sexual identity or things like that, that's a really good place for you to talk about how that has impacted your interest in studying this topic, or applying to this job, or whatever you're doing. And then a lot of places also ask for your career objectives. So this is kind of giving the impetus for why you want to do this research internship, why you want to go to grad school, what are you looking to do afterward. And that doesn't always have to be, I want to be a professor at an R1 institution. You can feel free to be creative and be honest, or say like, I'm not really sure, but here's, what I think I am interested in. Those are not set in stone, and nobody's gonna like hold you to it. All of that contrasts with the research statement, which is very much what you want to do. Often these are asked for in like fellowship or grant proposals where you're asking for money. They want to know what you're going to do with the money. And fellowships are really like the graduate research fellowship program through the NSF, are really looking at supporting graduate students, but they want to make sure that you've got an idea and plans, so that if they offer you money for 3 years of grad school, you're actually going to do something with it. So this is kind of the mix of your intellectual and creative side, with your scientific knowledge and abilities and like the ideas that you're really passionate about. This kind of goes like many of the scientific papers you've probably written, maybe for labs or things like that. You start with a background, introduction kind of thing, maybe a little bit of a literature review saying like, this is what's been done before. Then you present your hypothesis and what you're going to do, kind of flesh that out into specific steps or aims, kind of like a method section. And then you may, depending on the proposal, end up writing like a significance, kind of like a who cares, and some may even ask for like a specific budget breakdown or a timeline of how you're going to get this done in the year that they're going to give you money. Do those differentiations make sense? Does anybody have any questions about that? Cool. So some of you, I think in some of the breakout groups, talked a bit about cover letters. So what about cover letters? Where do they fit into this? A cover letter is something different. It's not quite a personal statement, but it's similar. So it usually is intended to accompany application materials. This is often, if there's a job posting, there'll be kind of this application call and say like, we want people who can do X, Y, and Z for our position. So this is really responding to that call. They're kind of more formal than traditional like personal statements, because it often starts with like, dear sir or madam, like I am writing in response to your posting about blah. And then really you've got, the next 3 paragraphs or so, whatever's left on that page, to introduce yourself and give a really strong first pitch of why you're a good candidate. This is kind of more like a summary or abstract of all of the big points you want to highlight. All of this will likely be in your CV or other application materials that you're including, but this is the cover letter. Like if you're thinking of a physical document, this would be the first page that you're going to read, and they're going to get everything they need to know in that first page that you will then expand upon in the later documents. So not all jobs or applications require these, but we figured we'd throw it in because it may come up depending on what you're applying for. All right, so we'll move on to the personal statement. So like I said, personal statements are all about you, whoever you are. These are a couple of examples of calls for personal statements from some applications that I wrote in 2015 when I was applying to the Research Experience for Undergraduates program through the National Science Foundation. So I've pulled out some big words that come up again and again. So you don't have to read all of these in entirety, but I'll highlight some of the terms that seem to be important. So talking about your motivation, your academic achievements, your research interests, or career goals. Again, research interests and career goals, career objectives, how this program is going to help you get to those objectives, why you're excited about science, and why you're qualified for this program. Your career objectives, the experiences you've had, either undergraduate research or internships, and how these things work together to prepare you for advanced study. So this is for the EEB graduate program. These first 2 are for research for undergrad. So they're looking for different people at different stages, which kind of plays into the questions they're asking. And then this last one is for the graduate fellowship, talking about your personal, educational, or professional experiences, so broad range, and how they're motivating you. They're asking for specific examples of what you've done, and to talk about the results and how those things have prepared you to go on to graduate school. So kind of the overarching themes that keep coming up here is that these personal statements are really asking for what specifically, whether these are experiences or achievements, personal or professional, makes you prepared to do this job, be a graduate student, take this research internship. They're also asking about your motivation. So, these kinds of things are looking for people who are kind of self-starters and intrinsically motivated to do science in this case. So it's okay to talk a little more personal level about like why you're excited about science, why this is something that you want to do. It's not just, like somebody's twisting your arm and saying like, you should go do an internship. It's something that you're really excited about. And then, why do you want to do this? What is this building to in your career, in your experiences as a scientist? And how is this specific, job you're applying to, this internship, going to help you build to that? So kind of seeing that you've got some forward thinking, and that you're going somewhere with this. And so kind of pulling all this together, things that you want to highlight in your personal statement is, well, above all else, first and foremost, you want to answer the question. So there will be a specific question that the research or the application is asking for in that personal statement. Make sure you answer that. And then in answering that, connect in who you are and what you've done. So first, what makes you unique? You want your reader to remember who you are and it's about your application after they've read yours and several others. So you want to kind of showcase your individuality and what makes you special and sparkly. And then, the skills you have. How are you qualified for this position? What has prepared you? This could be academic related. You did you're currently doing a bachelor's degree in something. Or it could be skills. You have worked in a lab and have bench skills. You've taken a class in coding and know R. This can be a whole bunch of different things kind of in your toolbox. And then you're also looking at like your career objectives. Where are you hoping to go in the future? What do you want to do next? How does this play into that plan? And then above all else, it's important, like this little man with his goatee and tie, to be enthusiastic and show that you're really excited about this opportunity. And this isn't just like one more form letter that you're sending off to, apply for another internship. You want to really show that like you're committed to this particular opportunity, and that's something that you're really excited about. Does that all make sense? Good. All right. So pulled out just 2 examples of ways harkening back to like middle high school English. I definitely had many English teachers who were very strong on the show, not tell kind of idea, in that like you can just straight up say like, I've done a lot of science and I think science is great and I'm really qualified because I can pipette things and I can, analyze data in R. And that's great and that's important to do in places, but in personal statements, you also really want to, sell something unique about yourself. And that's where this show, not tell can come in. I also like to think about vivid verbs. So strong active verbs that show you're doing something. So here are just 2 little snippets. I'll post this later if it's kind of hard to read right now. From Megan and my graduate research fellowship program applications. So these were the opening paragraphs of both of our personal statements. So Megan starts with, grab the clear nail polish and Scotch tape and meet me in 5 minutes. Gathered the required supplies and hurried after a senior research scientist. We weren't in the process of DIY manicures. Rather, I was learning how to take stomatal pressings for the first time. And so, all of a sudden you're immersed in this story and this experience of Megan's, and you're interested in like, well, why do we have nail polish and Scotch tape? And how does that, connect to you being a scientist? And that's and she goes on to explain, her experiences at research stations and how that's excited her about science. And so it's creative ways like that to kind of catch your reader's attention and showcase that you're a unique person who has had these cool experiences. I started as the classic when I was a child trope and talked about how I went on vacation and we always did outdoor things or went to aquariums with my family, and that I was just like a nature kid from the very get-go. And then I kind of built that into my career through high school and college and how that got me interested in science. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. But the big idea is to, put yourself into this writing and really show that there's a person behind these words and not just a bunch of text on a page. Are there any questions so far about personal statements or kind of how all of this looks in practice? All right, cool. If not, we'll move on to the research statement and we can come back to any of this later if there are more questions. So switching gears into something maybe a little less personal, the research statement. So these are 2 calls for research statements. The first one is from the UMN UROP application for this year. So that's coming up on the 18th or 19th of October at that deadline. So for the UROP application, they're asking for what are you researching in a clear, answerable question, and the methods you're going to use to find that answer. They want to make sure that you emphasize the intellectual merit. That could also be the significance. So why does it matter that we know this thing that we don't know right now? And they also emphasize that citations and references are required. So you need to make sure to cite sources that are informing, your background or perhaps your methods. The second one is from the NSF Research Fellowship Program. Very similar, talking about the topic and your general approach. How are you going to do this? And then kind of the outcomes. What potential does this have to advance our knowledge or have bigger impacts on society? So it's really, what are you doing? How are you going to do it? And why does it matter? And those are kind of the big three parts that often come into research proposals, which you may be familiar with if you've written similar things for like the biology foundations labs. I know they do those in 1961 and 2004. So kind of again, here what you're really highlighting is how your scientific skills and your creative side kind of come together into being able to ask a compelling scientific question. And then the important thing where they kind of ask for your methods and how you're going to do this is that you have a logical set of steps and kind of an organized thought of how to get from this creative idea you have and this question to an actual answer. So it's great to be ambitious and have these cool ideas, but if you don't know how to put them into answerable minute steps to move your progress along, you're not going to get very far. And so this is going to be a fun way to, be very creative, but also use kind of your background skills of the scientific method to know like, okay, how do I ask this question? How do I answer it? So this is just bits. There's a ton of words here. Don't read the words. Just to show that, this is a 2-page research proposal that I wrote for the National Science Foundation's Graduate Fellowship Program. And so you only have 2 pages. It's kind of limited. So, you want to have a little bit of space to set up your background. Maybe take half a page to say like, here's what's going on and why it's important. Here's what you need to know to understand the rest of my proposal, basically. A brief research plan of like, here's kind of how all of this fits together and what I want to do. And then break it down into a couple of steps and say, I have this one research question. Here's how I'm going to answer this question in different ways. And then why does it matter? These broader impacts. What are we going to learn from doing this research? How is that going to help people help science? And then, of course, all of your knowledge comes from somewhere else. So making sure that you cite your sources that you've used in some sort of work cited at the end that can tie to numbers up in the introduction or other types of citations if you're more comfortable with those. So we've talked about this already, so I'm not going to belabor this point, but especially for the Europe, they're really interested in this research question and a clear testable hypothesis. So a good hypothesis is something that you can actually answer. So let's say, you're interested in doing work out at Cedar Creek with the NutNet. And overall, your research question, which is kind of bigger and more broad, you're interested in how soil nitrogen levels affect species diversity. And that's kind of, a research question in the sense that like, it could encompass many, many different things. But to have a clear hypothesis that's testable and really strong, you then need to focus it down to, what can you change and what can you measure, basically. So maybe your hypothesis is that plots with added nitrogen will have a greater diversity of grassland species compared to untreated plots. And so that's something that you can very easily set it up an experiment, gather some data, and analyze that data to know, was it your hypothesis supported or was it not? So that's a really big part of like the UROP applications. They really want to see this thought process of being able to come up with a strong question and a testable hypothesis. You support that with some background, what has been done before that we know now, what are we trying to learn, what's missing, where's that gap in the knowledge, and why does that gap matter? Why are there things that we need to know? Where can we go from that knowledge? And then, set out a couple of specific steps of how you're going to take the knowledge that exists and your question and build them into some kind of new finding. Concluding in some kind of sense with, significance or broader impacts, who cares? Why does this matter for science or for people? Those can be pretty broad in terms of impacts on society. And you may be asked for other things like a timeline or budget. Those are not in the UROP, but other applications may ask for them. So just more things to squeeze into your page limit for sure. Are there any questions about the research statement? Cool. So the U has some really great writing resources that are available to students and undergraduate and graduate students. So if you're not familiar with them, I encourage you to check them out next time you have writing to do. I think they're all working in some Zoom pandemic capacity right now. So there's the Writing Center, which is general writing support for anything you're writing, whether that's, a history or an English paper, or scientific writing. There are specific folks who can help you with different kinds of writing. So I've got their website here. You can email them and set up time to meet with somebody and kind of talk about your writing, and they can help you through stuff. The UROP program also has past examples of successful proposals. That's just on the UROP page of the CBS website. So you can, see what other people wrote in the past and kind of use that as ideas. And then there's also the Science Communication Lab, which they seem to be doing smaller amounts of work right now than in a normal functioning time. But they're really focused on helping scientists communicate to the public. But they can be a really useful resource for helping you better communicate your science, probably more in the sense of research proposals, but I think they would probably be helpful for you to help sell yourself in a scientific context as well. So we'll include these links, we'll send out an email and include these links if you're interested in reaching out to any of these folks for additional help. And so you've got all these pieces of knowledge in your head, where do you go with it? Often just getting started can seem very daunting. So I like to start with really good organization, both organization in terms of deadlines and dates and what I'm writing. So often, keep a list of deadlines on like a planner or, a calendar kind of app, so that you give yourself plenty of time to write. If you're asking people to read drafts for you and give them back, make sure you're giving them an appropriate amount of time to respond to drafts. Professors, other graduate students, or even your friends are busy. So dropping a draft on them and saying, hey, can you have this back to me by noon tomorrow, isn't always the best way to get thorough feedback. I also like to use folders in my computer to kind of organize drafts. I'll often save different versions of it as I go through. And it's very important to make sure that you, if you're applying to lots of things at once, label them all differently so that it's like, research application for biological station A, research application for biological station B. Don't be the kid that sends the wrong personal statement to the wrong REU, because they won't want you. I did that. It was fun. Otherwise, oh, was there a chat? I just saw it. Aha. Cool. Yeah, so organization and like getting a plan together of like how you're going to write these things, because they do take time and you don't want to be doing it the night before. Strategy, decide what your priorities are, either by deadline, interest, how easy they are to complete. And with that, this might have been talked about in your breakout rooms, but I would like to say write smarter, not more. Often, if you're applying to multiple places, the personal statements may be very similar. They might not all ask the exact same question, but there are probably bits and pieces that you can use in multiple places and they will serve the same purpose. So I often like to kind of write a main version that sells all of the things I want to sell, and then kind of take that and customize it for each specific application. So I've got the main thing written, and then I can craft and tweak it little bits to kind of tailor that response to different schools or programs. It's okay to recycle your own writing. You don't need to write every personal statement over from scratch. Save yourself some time and heartache because you're still the same person. So you can probably reuse the stuff. And then I know Molly talked about this in the breakout room, but it's also good to think about your best writing environment. And this can help you be more efficient when you do sit down to write. So when, where, how, do you like to write in the morning? Do you do best in the afternoon? What kind of, can you find those times of day and set them aside for writing? Do you prefer to be in the library where it's nice and quiet? Can you work at home? Would you prefer to have music playing or not? Those kinds of things are good to kind of just like check in with yourself and figure out, because the better you know that about yourself and kind of set yourself up for success, the better you're going to be able to focus and write. And really just setting yourself aside time and saying, all right, I'm going to take 20 to 30 minutes here, and I'm going to put everything else away, and I'm going to focus on writing. And just having just little set blocks of time that is your writing time can really go a long way in getting moving on a draft or on a application or something that seems very daunting if you just like, well, I have 4 hours, let's go. But smaller blocks of time can sometimes be a good way to ease into that as well. And so with that, I will take any questions if there is anything that I haven't touched on or you'd like to hear a little bit more about, or if you're currently writing applications and are interested in getting some feedback from another undergrad or a graduate student on your writing, that can be really helpful just to have another set of eyes on what you're writing, kind of get out of your own head and see somebody else's perspective. So happy to work on that as well. That was a lot of words, I'm sorry. Any questions?
Janine, I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but I wonder if you could just like leave us with your top tips. Like, what do you think the big, like #1 things that you think people should take away from this seminar would be? Or just like tricks that you think are things that a lot of people don't know or takes a while to learn.
I would say, at least in terms of like writing generally, at least for me, figuring out when I write best and like setting aside sacred writing time is really been helpful for me. I write best in the morning. And so, setting aside a block of, and I prefer to have large blocks of time to write. So setting aside 2 to 3 hours, first thing in the morning has been really good for me to have good focused time to write. And I think Molly talked about this too, but like having a set goal of what I want to write in that time, and not just like throwing myself at the entire application at once, but saying like, I'm going to write this paragraph in this, hour, has been super helpful. And then I would say generally in terms of like writing personal statements, I don't think I can emphasize enough that most people undersell themselves and what makes them special and what makes them qualified. So getting comfortable with saying like, I'm really good at this and this and this, and this is why I think I fit really well with your lab, with this program, is super important, because often I feel like the problem is that, if you have a letter of recommendation that somebody writes, you write something about yourself and you're like, I'm okay at these kinds of things. And then if somebody, like a really good faculty member, writes you a letter of recommendation, they're like, this person's a rock star on these 4 things. And like, I was really impressed with this that they did and that, and they've earned this, award or honor. And so I think it's sometimes hard for us to write honestly about ourselves, because we've also always been put in a place of like, don't brag, like be humble about it. Other people are probably better at something than you are, which is true. But, you're really trying to sell yourself. So I think in this case, it's okay to brag. Don't overstate what you can do, but give yourself credit for, who you are and what you've done, and how that makes you special and qualified. I think that'd probably be my biggest you can do it kind of statement.
Can I share something that I've learned since starting
go
grad
for it.
school. So something we talked about in our breakout room was that like the first draft is often the hardest thing to get through, and outlining can help a lot with that. Something that I've learned since starting grad school is that it helps a lot to get feedback on an outline before you start writing. So, or at least that helps me a lot to like show it to someone else and then have someone else say if the structure that I'm going for makes sense. And you can actually do this at the writing center. So something that I do if I'm writing something big or something that I want to like do well and have go smoothly is that I take my outlines to the writing center, and they're really good about giving feedback just about like broad writing advice and kind of pointing you towards which topic sentences will be the most helpful for going forward. And that has made a really big difference in my writing. Or like you don't have to go to the writing center, but you know, someone who can give you feedback just on that kind of high level writing stage.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Amy. I feel like some people like have a bit, I definitely do have like a mental block with like, I don't need to go to the writing center. Like, I know how to write. And that's not necessarily like why you would go. It's more like, yeah, the more people who read your stuff and give you feedback or just more perspectives to help you get out of your own head and see, you know, what you're doing well or where you need help. So I would, yeah, I guess I say this mostly to myself, like try and put your ego aside and focus on making your writing better. And that often requires asking for help.
Yeah, I love it also because they're like getting paid to help people with their writing. So it's like instead of just asking someone for a favor, it's like these people are trained in how to help you with that. And I'm a big fan.
Yeah, they're there anyway, so you might as well make use of them. Uh, any other questions from, I guess, Annika or Ashley? Molly, do you have any other sage words of advice?
No, I think you guys hit most of them.
Cool. Yeah, we'll definitely send out in the email. We'll send out. We'll let people know that if they have specific interests in, you know, having a grad student help them, you know, read a draft or something like that, or want more connections to, you know, meet up with people at the writing center or something. We can help facilitate those. Because yeah, writing can often feel like a very lonely process, but it does. It's helped a lot by having other people read your writing, because you know you're writing this to share it with somebody else. So if it only makes sense in your head and on, you know, on the page it read in your voice, that doesn't get you very far. So it really is to your benefit to have as many different people read your stuff as possible, because that really just ups the chances of whoever ends up reading it, you know, if it's an application, really understanding what you're saying and all of your ideas coming across strongly.
Thanks, Janine.
Yeah, thanks everybody for showing up and hanging out with us. We'll send out the slides and post the video a little later today probably. And if you have further questions, feel free to reach out to your mentor or reach out to any of us in the planning committee. Good luck with your writing and don't feel alone. There are people here to help you.
Thank
See
you.
ya.